Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Curious is Better podcast. I'm Craig Lamb with Invative, and today we have Ben Banks from BNSF Logistics. Thanks for joining, Ben.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Hey, listen, why don't we just start off? Why don't, for the listeners, why don't you just give us a little bit of a, high level of what BNSF Logistics is up to and what
BNSF Logistics was established back in 2002. At that time, primarily as an IMC brokerage to drive business to BNSF Railway, our sister companies. We do a little bit of that still today, but primarily we move what we laughingly call the big, ugly, and the weird. And behind me, you probably can't see it in the camera, but we move huge transformers and generators and gas turbines, anything to do with the grid. That's our specialization. And we handle nuts to bolts for it. We have an engineering firm here. We're a PE firm in Texas, and we specialize in designing rail cars and designing fixtures for rail cars, everything that holds that big, ugly, weird thing in place. And we're just one of a handful of folks in North America that can do it. And so we stay very busy, and it's time for us to, we're making some transitions on our side to think how we can start to incorporate AI. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we're definitely having to lean in on that and technology in general, and excited about that conversation.
Well, you and I spoke earlier, we had talked about just all of the optimization tools that are happening in logistics these days, right? And you had brought up a point that I thought was super interesting is like how things default to like truck, you know,
Yes.
or intermodal, but they don't never. It's not never. That's a hyperbole, but like boxcar being in that mix, and like how these optimization tools are steering to what we call like traditional or maybe convenient, but that's not always the case, right?
That's correct.
I mean, and we talked about like measurable advantage, but you did go on to say too is that the generation of rail is kind of flipped. Like guys, you're our age, we're the same age. But you're saying that the generation ahead of us, they've kind of flipped, and has that been replaced, or what do you see going on?
It has. And I'll double click on something you just mentioned a moment ago. I don't believe, I'm willing to go out there. This may not be hyperbole. I don't believe you can purchase a TMS off the shelf that does anything more than truck, air freight, and intermodal. And most of them, it's just truck. And then you have some that have truck and intermodal and air freight. But by and large, that's where it's at. I've not found one, and I've actually had my team looking for one where you could get one off the shelf that's carload. Now, serving a lot of shippers throughout the years, I know that some shippers have tried to cobble together something because they have rail capabilities at maybe their brewery or at their manufacturing facility, but they've had to do that in-house, and it's never quite works out well. But as far as an optimization platform that includes traditional carload, I'm not sure that it exists. So that's a great segue into your first question here. Why is that? I think it's all tied together. Why does that not really exist in the marketplace? Did it exist at one time? It really hasn't. I said it was cobbled together by some, but you didn't necessarily need it because you had these people that for 30 or 40 years, they knew the value, the underlying value, the intrinsic value of traditional carload, and they knew how to implement it within their supply chains. But those individuals have left the marketplace. I don't think that's hyperbole either. Finding it very, very challenging. My teams are finding it very, very challenging to find someone to sit across the table from to talk about rail, and then not rely heavily on us to coach them through that. And that really started around 2015 in my experience, and accelerated through just after COVID, as those very experienced individuals either just left the industry altogether, or they left because of retirement. And they were replaced by individuals, in my experience, and my team's experience, they've been replaced by individuals that have a lot of over-the-road experience. They have maybe dabbled in intermodal, but virtually no traditional carload experience.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that baton was not passed. That transition and transferring of knowledge didn't occur this time. And I've been in the industry long enough to see that transference happen before, but it did not happen this time. And so folks are left hitting the easy button, as you and I've talked about. I don't know how to do rail, so I'm going to do pro.
I find it super curious because I hadn't thought about it till you brought it to my attention. And we were talking about just AI tools. Our last conversation was talking about AI tools, but when you configure these tools, there's a potential that boxcar shows a ton of benefit over other methods. Like, so why do you think it's been ignored if when you're doing the math or you're doing logistics for either it's going to be ease or security, fraud prevention, but just logistic requirements that boxcar and rail would point to that. Why do you think it's missing from these out of the box SaaSes? And because I can't keep up with how many TMSs there are now. It's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, but you could definitely keep up with one if it actually had carload in it. I wish there was. I'm afraid that we're going to have to build it. And I wish that there was something we could get off the shelf. Now, why that is, once again, I think that they didn't, a lot of shippers, say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they just built their own and it was probably added on to an existing TMS system that they had. Now, why did they even have to do that back then? Because it is complicated. I will be the first person to say introducing rail into your supply chain is complicated. It's very advantageous, and we're going to talk about that in a moment if you like,
Yeah.
but it is a challenge to initially implement it. So when I first started my career, I would run across and I would ask questions about my customers' TMS systems, and they'd even show them to me, and I saw, well, I've not seen this before. Like, well, that's because Jim Bob over here, he's the one that designed it, and he's the
Yeah.
one that knew how to do it. So even back then, they didn't have it off the shelf because it was so complicated and so specific to each shipper. Fast forward to where we're at right now, there's just a lack of knowledge of how to do that. So it probably never existed and really at all, but it definitely hasn't come to the forefront as something that you can, even with the advancement in technology and where we're going with AI, nobody's rolling it out now, even today, because what you need are those experts to help build those decision flows, to build those algorithms behind the scene. They have to be an expert in carload to be able to incorporate it. And those individuals have left the building.
It seems to me what I struck with the most, and again, I believe what you're saying. You're in it every day. I'm in it from project to project, but it's a definitive arm of the logistics industry, rail in general, right? And it's not going away, not anytime soon, not any horizon I can see. So it's like, how is it happening then? Brute force, like, or when they're out of options, is it the only option, even if there was more beneficial economically or safe for safety or logistically where rail would be considered? How's it happening now?
So I think overall, and someone on your team or in your audience might be able to double check me on this, but I believe AAR would show that traditional carload has a negative CAGR over the last 10 years. It is diminishing. It's in structural decline. It shouldn't be, but I think that it is. For our sister company, BNSF Railway, it ebbs and flows with them. You do have your largest shippers, you have your new cores of the world, you have your Molson Coors of the world. They've been doing rail for 100 years. But even with some of those shippers, not those ones in particular, but even with some of those larger shippers, the rail side of it is in decline. They have facilities that have been built around large rail yards where they could handle several hundred cars at one time if they wanted to, but they may want to, but they don't know how to anymore. Those folks have left the building, as I said, and as a result of it, they're still using carload, but it seems to be on decline year over year over year as they lean more heavily upon truck. So are a lot of shippers still using, are millions of loads still moved in the rail networks in traditional carload? And by traditional, I keep saying that. We're talking about box cars, we're talking
Yeah.
about flat cars, talking about covered hoppers, this bulk solution. Yeah, it's still out there. Railroads for sure are moving a lot of volume through it, but they are not moving as much as they did 5 years ago. And they probably won't move as much next year. So it's in this structural decline as shippers more and more either get out of it altogether or they don't know what to do with the capacity that they have.
Do you think it has anything to do with just the conservative nature of the industry, rail?
Of rail industry,
Yeah.
potentially, we have to be self-reflective about this, why this has occurred. And I think there are a lot of reasons why this has occurred, everything that we've talked about so far. But if you're going to meet your customers where they're at, you're probably going to need to lean into helping them build out their supply chains to incorporate rail. You're going to need to be able to handhold them as much as possible. And frankly, a lot of class one railroads don't have that capability anymore, either intentionally or not intentionally. However, I'll let them talk about why that's the case. But the reality is that the customer support functions are not what they used to be. And
But
they have
is that why you were considering, like, I don't know how much or little we want to talk about this in the level of detail anyway. But is that why the logistics arm is considering tools like AI to just make sure that they'll stay in the conversation, easily handle the stuff that, because there's nuance, right? There's the shades of gray and the noise inside of like the the configuration of shipping and logistics in general. Like you can't have AI just turn on, go good luck, right? There's stuff that has to happen.
Right.
But does that speak to the reasons that you're considering these tools or different technologies for you to be able to keep, I guess, up with meeting your customer where you are, to take your words?
Yeah.
Has that been the catalyst?
That's absolutely it. So I believe my opinion is that most class one railroads, not the short lines, I think they take a different approach, but the class one railroads have essentially made the decision, either intentionally or not intentionally, they've made the decision to allow either shippers to handle this, to manage, to learn about it, to manage their supply chains and include carload on their own, or to rely on the 3PLs of the world to do it. Instead of them doing it, they'll allow someone else to do it. And I think for years that probably worked okay. As I mentioned before, a lot of shippers had vertically integrated. They had that expertise in house. They didn't necessarily need the railroads to do it for them. And they definitely didn't need a 3PL to do it for them. And I think that's super important because there was a time, 3PL has been around for well over 100 years. And there was a time, even in the rail space, that a lot of 3PLs, the largest 3PLs, had traditional carload expertise that they could help a shipper with. But as shippers, they vertically integrated over the last 20 or 30 years, and they brought those expertise in-house. They didn't need it from 3PLs anymore. So the 3PLs then pivoted on their own and focused where customers were still super interested in them serving, and that would be largely in the trucking space or in the intermodal space. But traditional carload, 3PLs walked away from that as well. So what we have now as shippers are getting back to their core, we'll read about that. A lot of shippers are divesting of their supply chain business units and they're leaning back on 3PLs like they did maybe 30 or 40 years ago. Well, the problem is those 3PLs don't have those expertise either. So there's your problem. Class one said, shipper or 3PL, you can manage it. Shipper said, okay, we got this for a time. 3PL said, yeah, you shippers got this. Now the shippers are saying, we don't want to do this anymore. Don't know how to do this anymore. And there aren't any 3PLs in the market, or very few that know how to do it. That's where my company steps in and says, we do know how to do this. We know how to do truck. We know how to do barge. We know how to do rail. We're mode neutral from that perspective. And as you and I've talked about before, I feel like we have an onus. There's a big opportunity for shippers to incorporate carload again. And I think many of them want to. At the highest levels, C-suite level, many of them understand or can remember the value that carload brought, but they need a 3PL to step in there. Now, the challenge is for 30 or 40 years, you have that vertical integration. The shippers built their own TMS system to include carload. So if I'm going to do it for 50, 60, or even 100 shippers, I can't have someone going into each one of those shippers and building something from scratch through
That's right.
Excel sheets. And we need a real technology solution where the technology itself can actually receive data, and then we're behind the scenes helping it to make decisions, but ultimately it stands up on its own, and it's something that we can do quickly with every shipper that
Yeah.
is going to be leaning on us to do it. That's why we need the technology.
Yeah. So you're teeing it up for like the next part where I really want to get into, because I know that you're investigating some different stuff. And you know, as a CEO of this division, you have a lot of responsibility. And we're talking about using technology to gap these things that help scale your vision, right? You're using technology. You and I talked about too, is like, so how do you define that? How do you put rails on it? How do you define an MVP? How do you figure out where your risk sits, when you're introducing technology? Because there's adoption, there's implementation, there's risk in making mistakes, right? How many mistakes do you get before you lose a client?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's all these things. So how do you take that on when you're looking to work with technologists or a technology to implement to solve those real world problems?
And there are two sides of this coin too. When we first started talking about this, my brain actually went to the end user, the customer that we're going to be hired by. All the same questions exist there too. And I'll probably answer that one as well, because we're working through that. You and I've talked about, I'm reading that
Lean startup.
lean
That's
startup.
right.
I drew a blank there. I'm reading that lean startup and just helping me think through that, because startups aren't something that a lot of railroads do.
That's
So,
right.
as a CEO, if I'm going to lead my
It's a different
organization,
attitude, right? It's a
it's a
different
very
attitude.
different attitude. It's a very different attitude, not being on the bleeding edge of anything. We prefer to stay, like you said, a conservative industry. We prefer to stay out of the headlines. We prefer to stay behind the scenes, and we've done that for 200 years very, very well. But things are changing, philosophies are changing, and we've got risk. So I think there's an opportunity for us to maybe change our philosophy on that. But I think to answer that, there are shippers who are doing rail today that want to do more, but they either don't know how or they don't see how in-house combined with class one railroads capacity, how they can implement more than they are. They need a 3PL solution. They need someone to handhold them, help build out that next lane as opposed to just building a whole network from scratch. You probably pilot with, and that's what we're doing today. You pilot these kind of turnkey solutions. You take a shipper who wants it. Number one, they understand the value of it. They're doing it today. They just want to let's take on a little bit more. Maybe 25% more of our volume can be converted. So that's who you work with first, and you limit your exposure from that perspective for all stakeholders. And I think the class one railroads are pretty open to that. They're open to incremental change. They're open to an MV, a minimum
Viable product, yeah.
product. They're open to that because the exposure is lower. And so you're making incremental changes over. So I think the railroads are actually very interested in that. It's really getting that ultimate shipper to be interested in that.
Yeah.
But if they have a vested interest and already interested in converting more rail because they understand the value proposition, then you can work with them and you can iterate together. And I think that is the path forward. And that's definitely the path forward BNSF Logistics is going to take. We have a number of shippers that want to convert more rail. They don't know how to do it or they're afraid to do it because they need hand holding that doesn't exist. We can hand hold. We may have to iterate through technology. We have iterate the product itself, service product itself, service interruption mitigation, all that type of thing, how we do that exactly. And they're going to be open to that. And so that's the best path forward in that. Now, for my company, to your question, who you and I've talked about, there are a lot of companies that would love to partner with BNSF Logistics. That's what they say,
Sure.
right? To build this platform out. They don't really know what I'm saying when we may have a phone conversation and they come to my office and we have a lengthy discussion. And none of them are going to be afraid of it by any means. All of them would chomp, especially when they hear that when I tell them there's nobody else doing this. That's exciting. Okay.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But what's difficult for me is to know which one of these companies is the partner. That's risk in and of itself if we go down this path because I don't know anything about AI.
Yeah.
Just full
And
transparency.
we talked about this,
Yeah, I
right?
don't know. So the risk exposure is there. Now, what I do have, as you and I talked about too, is before we take any kind of material investment step, I have a team over at BNSF Tech, which is this kind of daughter company or sister company that BNSF Railway recently spun off. And they are bringing in people who know AI very, very well. They're bringing in people from Meta and from these other companies as well. So there will be an opportunity for me to say, hey, this is what questions should I be asking? Here's where we're at. This seems to make most sense. Maybe I talked to 15, I've narrowed it down to 5. Help me think through this. So we'll mitigate our risk through wisdom as much as we can by leveraging people in the space, such as yourself and others. I've got a good friend, Martin Liu, who owns a company called Comtrax. He's on the bleeding edge of this AI space too. Thankfully, I've got a network of people I can reach out to and say, hey, what do you think? And we're going to need that wisdom. There's still going to be, it's just going to happen, right? We're too bleeding edge at this point. There's going to be a mistake
Yeah.
made. We're going to make an investment we shouldn't have made, but it needs to be an MVP. And that's why this makes so much sense. We're going to iterate. We don't have to hit home run at the first at bat. We're going to go for base hits. We know we're going to strike out, but the risk will be mitigated because we're going to go slow. Now,
See,
some
and
of my
that's what I
shippers
think
wish I
too. Is
wasn't going slow, but
I think that's got to be celebrated because you're a couple of things you said are spot on. When you talk about technologies that are new and they're bleeding edge, engineers like me, you want to get excited. You're like, let's get in the game, let's get dirty, let's do it now, right? And you're just looking for an application, like where can I put this? And I'm sure you get surrounded with that, and that kind of rhetoric is exciting, especially when you can tag it with, no one's doing this right now. Like there's a gap in the industry, which, and you and I spoke, it's clear there's the gap exists. How do we make these tools fit it? But you staying sober and calm and focused on the MVP versus getting swirled up into the hype that can, really fail project after project, I think should be acknowledged and celebrated. And you should have somebody in your corner that's keeping you, like keeping your, what's the word? That fortitude that, where you don't get swept up in, I can't think of the word.
But we're going to
Um,
stay anchored. I think that's ultimately
yeah,
what you're
right.
saying. We're going to stay anchored. And what will be nice too is as we're building this out, if we have those first adopters that we can work with that already understand the value of traditional carload and what this TMS system is going to open their eyes to, that will be helpful too. As long as I have willing participants all throughout this process, we'll all be safer and better for it. And these folks who partner with us on the front end, I mean, there's going to be, you know, a huge tailwind for everybody involved eventually. Let's say you have a large shipper who's willing to iterate with us on this. They may have upwards of 100, 150 lanes that this optimization tool is going to say, based on your values, your strategies, based on your current network and its relation to other modal networks, here's how you should be doing it. And it may save them millions, millions and millions of dollars is
Mhm.
what I feel like a lot of companies are walking away from. So that's going to be a benefit to them. And then also to the industry at large, we'll be able to take those learnings to the greater marketplace.
Yeah.
It may take a
Well,
few years, but
let's close with that. Like, just your insights with that. Like, where do you see the impact of AI or technology at large, uh, and its impact on the industry? Let's just say a year from now. Where do you think is going to go from concept to actually a staple within the industry?
I think that I'll limit, it's only a few minutes here. So I'll limit to the rail industry specifically,
Sure.
where I think we're going to see a lot of exciting. In fact, we already are. There are real technologies that all the class one railroads are rolling out that, if they're not full blown AI, it's machine learning, and it's exciting nonetheless for this industry. I mean, the reality is that for a long time, locomotive technology has been such that they could operate without anybody on the train. Now, we've all made decisions and strategies in place with our union partners to keep people on those trains, but the technology is being invested in to make it safer, to make it where if there's an incapacitation, whatever the case may be, the train could be operated on its own from a distance, from a centralized location. And that technology is already there. There's also technology that BNSF Railway is piloting, and I mean, more than piloting at this point, where they can do all kinds of inspections without unmanned inspections across the rail.
Mhm.
They've gotten some pushback for different reasons I won't get into here, but that's great technology. I mean, it's just speeding, it's making it safer, it's speeding it up, it's reducing human factor incidents, all those types of things. And I think that's going to accelerate. I think you'll get to a point where you have inspections that are being done. I mean, everything's just going to speed up, speed up, speed up, and even be safer than it's ever been. All right,
Do you
so I'll
think
pause
that's
there.
going to get all the way down to like switch depots and stuff? The complexities of that?
Yeah,
Because
I
again,
don't think
that's
they're
that's still
I
kind of
actually
a
don't think they're very
manual.
far from that. I know for a fact that some class ones that, well, my sister company, BNSF Railway in particular, they're already working through AI generated like switch lists, and
Yeah.
used to, that's where I started out. I'm actually marking up a switch list for an individual to go out and say, okay, I'm going to put this car on this track and this car on that
Mhm.
track. They're way beyond that. So it may not be anything that's really exciting for the public, but those who are in the industry are recognizing the real efficiency that
Yeah,
technology
and
brings.
efficiency equals money.
Yes,
So,
for
yeah,
everybody involved,
that's
the
right.
shippers as well, because things are moving more quickly, they're moving more safely, there's less damage to their equipment. All those are type of, now taking the 3PL space. I think that, every 3PL has got to be as lean as they can possibly be. We are a value add. Many of us are, we're asset based. We've got rail cars and cranes, things like that. But the reality is we got to stay lean, and we're going to make sure that you had asked me a question about where the intersection of humans and technology is going to be.
Yeah,
And I,
I
I
don't know.
can't really, I can see a future where we have a lot of technology that's operating without a human. But I foresee, at least in our company, a future where all of our human resources are being helped, supported, capacity increase because of technology. So I can see maybe some technology standing up on its own. That's a lot of what we're talking about here. But every human being that, from my legal department to everywhere, we're going to have technology that's going to support us to do more with less. And we've been throwing that in the industry. We've been throwing that word around or
Mhm.
that phrase around for about 10 years. But we're actually at a point now where we actually might be able to do more with less. and not be burning out your employees
Yeah,
while
I
you're
agree
doing
with you. I asked the question because it's for me, it reveals attitude, right? There's some things too when we talk about where AI is supposed to be helping the employee, not replace the employee. Now, there's some tasks that that employee has to oversee that can be autonomously handled by
it.
AI,
Sure.
but it doesn't remove the value of that role because of what really so
It
specifically
just
when
increases
there's
the
so much gray.
capacity of that role.
That's right.
That's what it should do, and that's what we're looking for it to do, and we're actively looking for it to do it now. What
Yeah.
we talked about here, this automation of the optimization platform, that's really phase two for us. What we're talking with these AI companies around about, but we're also talking to them about, hey, we actually made a list. Here's all the stuff that we've got employees that do this every day. It's the same process. That's where we need to start. That's the low hanging fruit.
Well, listen, I appreciate you joining. This was a really interesting conversation. I appreciate it a lot. Everybody, this is Ben Banks. Sorry, Ben Banks.
I thought I was in trouble there for a second.
Yes, that's yeah. Well, I was so formal the last time. You're like, Ben's fine. It's good.
But
This is Ben. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it very, very much.
thanks for having me.